Some speculation from the beginning of the week had me wondering, what if the Dolphins get a little crazy this offseason? We're going to explore what that could look like here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Special thank you to each and every one of you who have helped to make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use code Locked On NFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. What if the Dolphins get crazy this offseason? And there's been some breadcrumbs that the Dolphins, at least the higher-ups who are presumably still going to be a piece of this puzzle, which is always concerning when they're making plans and they don't have a GM in place, right? Or they're brainstorming things. And I guess you probably have to have some of these conversations, but there's been some breadcrumbs as far as you go back to the trade deadline and who the Dolphins did and didn't move, and then why they didn't move. And when the Jets traded away Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner, they talked about, kind of the arms race in the AFC East and the Patriots and Bills having, this was NFL Insider. I think this was Ian Rappaport talking about this. It was either him or Adam Schefter. And they were talking about how the Jets now have all these picks and the Patriots have Drake May and the Bills have Josh Allen, and kind of leaves the Dolphins where like they may get a little ambitious this offseason to try to realign the organization to have assets to move forward with. And then Tua goes to the bench and they're talking about making a decision with Mike McDaniel and moving on from Tua and making other decisions with other players. So there's been enough breadcrumbs here, and now paired with Tua Tagovailoa going to the bench and the reports that they're going to move on from him this offseason. And then Drew Rosenhaus saying, I'd expect the Dolphins to explore the opportunity to move up. Feels like a very Miami thing to do, and I would like to start the show with this very explicit disclaimer. At this point in time, trading up in the draft for a quarterback, for the cost of what that's going to look like, is not something I'm overly keen on thinking being a good idea. Because you are just coming out of the darkness that was the 22 and 23 drafts where you didn't make any draft picks early in the draft. And the outlook of potentially doing that all over again for multiple years, presumably, because that's probably the cost it would take, is not a very fun concept for me. But as is always the case on this show, I try to prepare us for every outcome when these kinds of conversations arise. So there was, Drew Rosenhaus said it was with Josh Moser on beginning of the week, and he said, he invoked the name Fernando Mendoza, who obviously wins the Heisman, is the favorite right now to be the QB1 in the draft, although I am partial personally to Dante Moore of Oregon if he ends up coming out in this class. But like those are the two guys that are perceived to be top of the draft quarterbacks. And I don't think they're slam dunk picks like some guys in years past, but the position premium is going to push them way up the draft boards if they're both in the class, right? So that buzz has had a lot of people talking this week about the Dolphins and trading up. Pro Football Focus just did a mock draft where they had the Dolphins trading up to the #1 overall pick with the New York Giants and drafting Fernando Mendoza. So what I want to do is I want to look at the historical track record of making trades into this stratosphere of the draft, the top of the draft board, top 5 for a quarterback, because that's where you're going to have to go. The Dolphins right now picking 10th in the order. They could be as high as 8th. I think that's the probable outcome for them. Like, I don't think they'll win either of the next 2 games. And I think the Bengals will beat either the Browns or the Cardinals for at least 1 win, which would move Miami past them if they lost their last 2 games. And then the Commanders have who's the other team? NFL Tankathon. Yeah, the Saints, have the Titans, and then they have the Falcons. I think the Saints will win one of those games. I mean, the Saints have won 3 in a row and 4 of the last 6. They're playing reasonably good football right now. I mean, they smoked the Jets last week. They beat the Panthers and Bucks the 2 weeks before that. So I think the Saints will win at least one more. I think the Bengals will win at least one more, and I would pick the Dolphins to lose the last 2, finish 6-11, in which case they're picking 8. I will say this prospect of moving up in the draft becomes exceedingly more difficult if you're outside the top 10. And that's where some of my past legwork at my past stops is going to come in very handy for us, because it was back in 2019. Ironically enough, November 6th, 2019, I wrote this story I was with the Draft Network at the time, and it was Let's Make a Deal, a recent history of trades into the top 5 for quarterbacks. We've since seen a few additional trades added since I wrote this, but I do want to just read the introductory snippet because it's funny to see the overlap that exists with the Dolphins. So we continue to work our way through the NFL and college football season. We're able to dial into who are most likely names to be in demand. Some are well established, such as Chase Young and Tua Tagovailoa. Others are red hot and could crash the party, like Joe Burrow. Others are watching their stock arguably fade at this point, such as Justin Herbert. But of the 8 teams with 2-0 wins in the NFL, 4 of them, Cincinnati, Miami, and Tampa Bay, have a clear need at quarterback. Denver at 3-6 and Tennessee have an established need for a single caller as well, but sit more on the fringe. With this much demand in the quarterback market, have seen teams in years past go all in. The Dolphins were looking to avoid a full-blown tank and have already perhaps won too many games for the top overall pick. What would a trade look like for a team that wants to get back up into the top? This is where we find ourselves yet again, right? We didn't tank this season like we did in 2019, but we did have a need at quarterback that has emerged for a team that looked like they were going to be at the top of the draft and then got hot in the middle of the season and won a few games that's pushed them outside of the primary top 5 window. We're going to explore what these deals have looked like. And then in particular, with one trade that's happened recently, there's some clues that if you stack it on top of what the insider reporting has kind of been nudging at is on the table, might be relevant information for us to keep in the back of our mind, with the acknowledgement this is not an endorsement. This is not something that I would do, but we do have to explore all of the avenues and possibilities to be prepared for whatever comes down the pipe. That's next. Make sure you guys stick with us. This episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by PrizePicks. The holiday season is one of the best times for sports. There's bowl games, basketball matchups, playoff pushes, and it's all happening at once. And while we're making choices every day, the most fun ones are the ones that get you paid, like the ones at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. You pick more or less on at least 2-player projections, lock in your lineup, and you are in the game. It's simple, fast, and available in 45 states, including Florida. PrizePicks has added an extra layer of excitement for the holiday sports season. With their new stacks feature, you can pick a same player up to 3 times in one lineup, like more on a quarterback's passing yards, passing touchdowns, and rushing yards. Deposits and withdrawals are quick and easy, which keeps everything flowing smoothly. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it is good to be right. All right. So I had three subcategories when I did the article back in 2019. And these were all trades into the top 5 for a quarterback. trades in the layup range, which was inside the top 6 up further into the top 5, where a team doesn't have to go too far down in the queue. Mid-range jumpers, which happened between picks 7 and 10, which is the range in which the Dolphins currently exist in. And then from deep downtown, which would be outside the top 10. The layups inside the top 6. We cover this, we acknowledge this group while also acknowledging the Dolphins would need to do some moving and shaking and potentially two-piece a trade to get from where they are at right now into the top 6 to then move further up the board. This was Sam Darnold with the Jets in 2018, and all of these trades were since 2009. So the last 15 years. Mitchell Trubisky in 2017, and Robert Griffin III in 2012. The Jets one was very modest. It was 3 second-round picks along with pick number 6 to go up to number 3 to draft Sam Darnold. The Bears and 49ers did a flip-flop in 2018, which was just one spot. The 49ers were picking 2. The Bears were picking 3. They flipped them. That came at the expense of 3rd and 4th round picks and a future 3rd round pick. So that was no round 1 or round 2 draft capital other than the pick swap from 2 and 3. That's obviously not the world that the Dolphins live in. That's kind of a different beast. That one was pretty unique. But then there was the RG3 trade, which I don't think, obviously he was the runner-up to Andrew Luck being the number 1 overall pick. But he was a Heisman winner. That was a crazy deal. The Washington franchise sent their 6th overall pick in 2012, their 2nd round pick at 39 overall, and their 1st round pick in each of the next 2 seasons to go up 4 spots. So in approximately the same distance of the draft that it costs the Jets to go get Sam Darnold for 3 2s, Washington sent 3 1s and a 2 to go get RG3. And that was from a trade value chart perspective, that was absolutely crazy. So you get a little bit of an idea here, depending on the quarterback class, depending on the league covets the quarterbacks, the cost can be modest and the cost can be monumental, right? And as we keep that in the back of your mind as we get to the mid-range jumpers, which is from pick 7 to 10. The Dolphins, ironically enough, were involved in this deal because the Dolphins were the team that traded the 8th overall pick to the Philadelphia Eagles, who picked 13th in 2016. The Dolphins took Byron Maxwell, Kiko Alonso, and pick 13 for pick 8. So the Dolphins added 2 starters, one of which, God bless Byron Maxwell, catastrophic disaster. But Kiko Alonso was a player who, off-ball linebacker and all of the positional value, and guy played well, but guy did not play as a marquee player that would help justify going down 5 spots in the first half of the first round of a draft. But Philly two-pieced it. And I have this in the back of my head too, because that's probably a pathway that could be viable for Miami. But it was then Philly going from 13 to 8 with Kiko Alonso and Byron Maxwell, and then they coughed up 8, a 3rd round pick, a 4th round pick, and a future 1 and 2. So the 1 was in the next year, and the 2 was in 2 years to go up from 8 to 2 as the Rams had traded up to go get Jared Goff, and the Eagles traded up and went and got Carson Wentz. So it cost them Kiko Alonso, Byron Maxwell, their 3, their 4, their future 1 the next year, and the year after that, their future 2. It was a pretty hefty cost, but they got creative because they sent they sent established players as a part of the process to go from 13 to 2 via 2 trades. I acknowledge this one to also acknowledge the Bryce Young deal, where the Bears got DJ Moore a first-round pick, a second-round pick, a future first-round pick, and the year after that, a future second-round pick. So it was 23 first and second-round picks, 24 first-round pick, and 25 second-round pick for the first overall pick, which the Panthers used on Bryce Young, and a 2023 second-round pick. It's a lot of moving parts, right? But it involved a player to go from 9, which the Bears used that pick for Darnell Wright, to go get Bryce Young. And of course, the following year's 1 for Carolina ended up being the number 1 overall pick, which the Bears used to draft Caleb Williams. So both of the 7 to 10 trades involved a pretty reasonable amount of established NFL talent to get it done. I also think about what the Bills did, and it wasn't what they got to 7 when they drafted Josh Allen, right? They made the playoffs that year. They were 9-7 wild card team. I think they picked 21st, but they used Cordy Glenn as an offensive tackle to get halfway up and close the gap, and then traded up again for Josh Allen. These are the kinds of things where when NFL insiders start talking about, they may have to make other decisions with talent on the roster to kind of shake things up with their assets to get realigned for keeping pace in the AFC East. That's where my mind goes, because we had these Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane, Jordan Brooks, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Bradley Chubb, kind of trade deadline rumors. The Dolphins kind of stood pat on all of it. The only move they made was the one in which they had a deadline, right? Like Jalen Phillips was the expiring contract. If we don't make the decision now, we either lose him in free agency, we have to re-sign him, we have to use the franchise tag, and our salary cap situations are really not in a position to allow us to use the franchise tag. So let's make this decision now, and let's leave everything else for the offseason when we get a better idea of where we're at, what we're doing, what we need, who's making the decisions. Let the GM, let's not proactively make decisions for an executive that might not be under contract. So from that perspective, like I was fine with how they handled like the deadline decision versus everything else. But it feels like all these other things with other players for assets could be on the table. Again, that's not an endorsement. I'm not sitting here laying all this out to say we need to give our first round pick or our first round pick next year or our first round pick the year after that, right? Because that's what the 49ers did for Trey Lance, which is one of the outside the top 10 picks. We're going to get those 2 trades. There's 2 of those trades? 3 of those trades, including a Mark Sanchez trade. So that was in 2009. We'll get into the Sanchez, Goff, Trey Lance compensation packages from outside the top 10, and then just acknowledge who some of the players are that might be implicated in that. That's next here, Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. Three additional deals from outside the top 10 to get into the top 5 for a quarterback. Jared Goff in 2016, Mark Sanchez in 2009, Trey Lance in 2021. The Goff deal, the Rams went from 16 to 1 overall in a quarterback class that had QBs go 1 and 2. And they did it by sending their first round pick, 16th overall, 2 2016 second round picks, a 2016 third round pick, a 2017 1 and 3. So everything in the top, it was 4 top 100 picks in 2016, including 2 2s, and then a 1 and a 3 in 2017. It's pretty hefty. And those picks in the second round were at 43 and 45 overall. So 2 picks in the top 50 to go with the first round pick. And they were able to do that with Tennessee because Tennessee had just drafted Marcus Mariota before that, and they were in position to kind of move and shake. Mark Sanchez deal, They went from 17 overall. It took 17 and a 2 plus 3 veteran players, Kenyon Coleman, Abram Elam, and QB Brett Ratliff. And they did that deal with the Browns. None of the players that were traded to Cleveland lasted more than 2 seasons in Cleveland. It was very cheap. And what's the saying? You get what you pay for, right? It should have been a red flag that a quarterback, a jump 15 spots was enough. 12 spots. They got up to 5 overall. That should have been a bit of a red flag. If you're going to make this kind of splash, have some conviction, like the 49ers did when they got up to number 3 from 12 with the Dolphins and Chris Greer in 2021. Dolphins got 21 first-round pick at 12, 22 first-round pick, 23 first-round pick, and 22 third-round pick. Of course, Miami would move around and reallocate some of those assets within the same day. But that's a handsome price to pay, and they picked Trey Lance, and obviously they didn't get what they paid for in that regard either. But I think that's the concern, right? Is look at the names here that these get done for. Sam Darnold with the Jets, it didn't work out. Mitchell Trubisky with the Bears, it didn't work out. Robert Griffin III, it didn't work out. That was injury, right? He was phenomenal as a rookie. Carson Wentz looked like he was going to have an MVP caliber season, gets hurt, gets replaced by Nick Foles, and then they replace him with Jalen Hurts. Jared Goff turned it around, but his best years have not been with the Rams. Mark Sanchez, Bryce Young, Trey Lance. It's scary hours. If this is what we're talking about, you better be right, or else you're looking at a roster implication and spinning your tires. Who are some of the players? We mentioned some of them. Jalen Waddle reportedly had a 1+ asking price. They reportedly got offered a 1+ asking price, but the picks that they turned down included from Buffalo was reported a 1 in 2027 instead of getting a same year first round pick offer from the Bills for Jalen Waddle. That is a player that I think would, we invoked the name DJ Moore, right? And that was a part of the Bryce Young trade. I am anti-trading Jalen Waddle. I think there's abundant value in having skill players around a young quarterback when they come into the league. And I don't think Waddle's been fully optimized in his role and usage. I think that would be, I would not want to hear, oh, that's so Dolphins when Waddle goes somewhere else and gets 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns in a different passing structure when you moved on from him, because there's a lot of people that like dog Jalen Waddle, and he can't throw himself the football. And I see him open a lot on tape where he's not getting the football. So I think Waddle is one. Achane is another. I think Minkah Fitzpatrick's maybe a little bit more of like the Kiko Alonso. I don't want to put him in that bucket of player, but like it's different to trade like what you would expect to be a number 1 wide receiver target or a young star player like a Devon Achane versus Minkah kind of in the later chapters of his career, but still a very impactful starter, or like a Bradley Chubb. The finances don't make that an attractive contract for somebody from a draft valuation standpoint. But, I think all those kinds of players, every player that was on the trade deadline conversation piece but didn't get moved, are the kinds of players that I think you have to keep in the back of your head if the Dolphins are going to do a combination of picks and players if they were to get crazy, because they say, hey, we maybe feel like we really have conviction about this guy. We think there's blood in the water. Maybe everybody else is kind of holding out for the 27 class. We maybe feel like economically it can be a net plus for us to go up and make a deal. They've obviously got to make a decision at general manager first. Well, maybe it's Champ Kelly, and maybe that's why these conversations are being had. Maybe it's not Champ Kelly, and these are just conversations that are kind of leaking out into the ethos because they're talking about, hey, what do we have to do? Like, what kinds of things are we asking of an executive? Like, what's your plan to get us out of the mess we have at quarterback? I would assume nothing's off the table, and that's what makes it an exciting offseason. We just wish the Dolphins had more exciting seasons and less exciting offseasons. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. Kyle Krabs, keep it locked in here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys checking out the show. I will come back, talk to you all again tomorrow for a special holiday edition of Locked On Dolphins. I hope to see you then.